Thank you all for coming. Welcome. Today, I'll be pulling back the curtain a bit on how top game studios stay ahead through iterative testing, leaving a lot of other studios in the dust. Sounds a little bit dramatic, but often that's the key ingredient to a hit. So let's kick it off talking about what we'll be tackling today. In this session, I'll be covering why integrating testing into your strategy is an absolute game changer, real stories from times in my career where testing turned near disasters into massive wins, how to build a blueprint that fuels hits, the secret weapon for making smarter decisions, and ultimately, how you can apply all of this to your own games starting today. You'll leave with at least one testing idea you can begin exploring right away. Now, let's kick things off with a little exercise. So this is a very common fork in the road. You're in a meeting, you're debating a creative decision, and it can feel like a gamble because oftentimes it is. How often have you relied on instinct, gut feeling, or just a quick team vote to decide on a creative direction? Now, imagine going into that decision with confidence because it's backed by real player data. I'm going to utilize PickFu throughout this presentation, and we'll get more into what that is, but at a top level, it's my go-to market research tool. It's fast, it provides qualitative and quantitative data, and it has the targeting that I need to make quick decisions based on what players will want. So let's put these icons to the test. If you had to pick one of these for a mobile cat cafe game, which would it be? Go ahead and just shout out your choice. So as you can kind of hear, everyone had a different opinion or perspective, and that's exactly why testing is important. So let's see how everyone did. E is the winner here, but by looking at it in just this dimension and calling it a winner, we're doing ourselves a disservice because the real question we want to answer is, what do our specific players want? Maybe your pick matches the test results, maybe it doesn't, but is that a risk you're really willing to take? We could be leaving a lot on the table by calling it a day. What if there was a version of this asset that could boost performance by an additional 15%? Had we ran more tests, we could have further squeezed out performance. Or what if there was a creative red flag, something subtle, easy to miss, that tanks your conversion once it goes live? We could have easily avoided these situations with a quick test. This is where PickFu changed the game for me. Instead of taking an educated guess and hoping for the best or spending a considerable amount of time and budget on live optimization, I'm able to get clear answers and enter the market with pre-qualified assets and ideas. This ultimately reduces risk and saves money in addition to development time in a lot of these cases. We'll take a deeper look at this data from the test, but first, let me give you a little context about who I am. So I'm Heather De Bernardi. I've spent a little over 16 years in tech and gaming, working across marketing, creative, and product organizations. I've been at startups, AAA studios, and virtually everything in between. What I pride myself on, though, is building frameworks that guide teams to test, optimize, and refine assets and ideas so that we're making smarter, data-driven decisions instead of guessing our way through high-stakes choices. It's not something I just believe in. It's something I've seen change the game time and time again. And today, I want to show you exactly how you can use that to your advantage. Before we get back to the Cat Cafe poll and get into a little targeting and segmentation, let's talk a bit more about what exactly PickFu is. PickFu is a tool I came across pretty early in my career. I spent a lot of time at startups with no dedicated insights teams, which meant I had to find my own path to getting both qualitative and quantitative data, and pretty fast. Click tests required fairly large budgets to reach a conclusion. Traditional surveys took too long, and finding custom panels is also very costly. The sheer volume of things I wanted and needed to test just wasn't feasible with the budgets I had. And above all else, like it just slowed down the decision-making process, and PickFu solved that for me. It's fast, it's highly targeted, and it removes the need to source panels. Plus, it was simple enough that any team member could use it, no matter their background. But why am I talking about it? I felt like studios were stuck in this outdated way of testing, and I needed something that could keep up with the pace of the industry I was in and also the departments I was in. So I needed faster insights with the right audience and to make real impact. Teams tend to default to long-form surveys and relying on an insights team to handle everything. But ultimately, again, that slows down the decision-making. It's a process that, to me, just doesn't fit the speed of modern marketing and product cycles. That pain point led me to find PickFu, a tool that lets me run tests in a way that actually matched the fast, iterative nature of the teams I was on. I needed results in hours, sometimes minutes, not days or weeks or months. The ability to quickly validate a concept, game feature, or creative idea completely changed my approach to marketing, game development, and creative. The TLDR here is it sparked a testing renaissance at almost every studio I've been at. It helped me pull teams away from what I consider a bad habit, which is relying purely on gut instinct instead of validating ideas with data. That in itself was one of the biggest shifts, getting teams to move away from intuition-based decisions and instead embrace fast, actionable insights. Now that we've covered why PickFu changed the way I test, let's dive back into our Cat Cafe tests, starting first with the setup. So like I said earlier in the presentation, testing isn't just about picking a winner. It's about making sure the right people are choosing it. And right can look different depending on your marketing strategy, the age of your game, and a lot of other variables. So that's why setting the proper foundation here is incredibly important. The base panel should always reflect who you're trying to attract. So naturally, in this case, we targeted mobile gamers. Another layer we want to consider is the reporting. We want to ensure reporting accurately reflects the unique aspects of our game and strategy. Some aspects might be the genre, the spend levels, or even how much time they actually spend gaming. If you're testing with the wrong audience and you're not drilling down into each segment, your results won't match up to the live data, and ultimately, the data will be much harder to action. A winning creative might not actually drive conversion if the people choosing it don't reflect your real players or the audience you're trying to capture. Let's start breaking down exactly what this looks like in practice. Even when a creative seems like the clear favorite, we need to ask who's choosing it. We targeted mobile gamers, so that's a good start. Everyone's sort of pre-qualified here, but let's dig deeper into their spending habits. Option E performed well overall, but when we filter by spender behaviors, what happens? In this case, there aren't really any dramatic shifts, but this is not always the case. Just because a creative resonates overall doesn't mean it's optimized for revenue-driving players. That's why we need to look at all of the different angles before we make a decision. Let's go another layer deeper. We know we're a simulation game, so the next logical step is to take a look at performance within that cohort. A creative that works for general mobile gamers might not necessarily work for our core audience. And what do we see? Performance trends hold steady. Option E still dominates. That's a good sign. Does that mean we should stop here? No, because the best insights come from going deeper. What else can we analyze to make an even smarter decision? We've confirmed that simulation players favor option E, but before we lock it in, let's push further. What happens when we analyze votes by playtime habits? Do we see shifts between casual players and high engagement players? Here's where things start to get a little more interesting. Option C closes the gap with E for those who spend the most time gaming. Since we most definitely care about engaged gamers, this starts changing the picture in the next steps. We know that players who stick around longer tend to be the ones who spend. So at this point, I'd want to dig into the qualitative data, the comments, the why behind these choices. Are there elements of C that players love but feel slightly off, and that's bringing performance down? Could we refine E with elements from C and get an even stronger version? Let's keep going. So numbers tell us what's working, but qualitative data tells us the why, and we can take that why into new iterations. Are they drawn to the design? Does it clearly convey the game's identity? Are there unexpected insights that could lead to an even stronger creative choice? This is where we get out of black and white thinking and into strategic refinement. We start adjusting, evolving, and getting closer to what players actually want. In this comment here, E is in the middle of the pack. What takeaways could we bring in to push performance even further? As we can see here, or maybe not, that cuteness was certainly a factor, but what else can we pull from these comments? As we start reading more into the comments, we start seeing a common theme emerging around perceived cuteness and some feedback around contrast and shape. Is there anything else, though, that would actually help us move into a new iteration? In this specific comment, we see that active cats that are cooking or shopping indicate to the viewer that there could be a relative game mechanic. If this is something we know is within our game, maybe we can start exploring there and begin to adapt our creative strategy, especially as we'll want to refine into different audiences to match up with our marketing. But how do you adapt a creative strategy? As we expand it to new audiences, marketing mixes, and platforms, we don't just want to throw the same creative at everyone. Instead, we want to refine and test into specific segments that we're looking to target. As an example, we have a comment summary for each option we tested. For the options we want to graduate to the next test, we'll want to look at these and identify what specific comments or areas stood out that we'll then want to utilize in the hopes of better capturing the different audience types and segments we're targeting. This is usually where marketing can also tap in and share their current targeting to match up to our panel and reporting as we're defining the next round of tests. You can use feedback from each segment to start tailoring each individual creative, and so the iterative test cycle begins. Now that we've got our first test under our belts, let's look at the broader picture and better understand why top studios never launch untested. I've talked a lot about how testing refines strategy, but let's get real. What happens when you don't test? Data crushes gut instinct every time. It's easy to assume we know what will work, especially when you've been in the industry for a long time, but without validation, even the best ideas can flop. Testing turns hunches into wins. It takes the guesswork out and makes sure we're putting our resources where they're actually going to move the needle. Before I dive into some real-world examples from my past, let's take a look at some hard data that shows exactly why testing isn't optional. It's table stakes. Starting first with this top line, 45% of IAP revenue comes from the top 2% of users. Are you actually resonating with them when you're executing your creative strategy? Unoptimized store creatives can tank conversion rates by up to 30%, and that's just from poor visuals or messaging, which can arguably be an easy fix. Games that A/B test ad creatives see up to 40% higher ROAS, because testing lets you stop wasting spend on underperformers and allows you to pre-qualify concepts before they ever go live. Iterative testing on app stores can boost installs by 15 to 20%. What are you leaving on the table by not experimenting? The takeaway for me here is testing isn't just a nice to have. It's the difference between a hit and a flop. Every top studio bakes it into their strategy. Now let's take it out of theory and into practice. One of the first major tests that changed the way I thought about it all came very early in my career. I had no insights team and a big decision to make. Could adding a celebrity boost my game's performance? It was pretty high stakes in that it could potentially make or break the success of the game. So I had to get scrappy because we were a small startup, and at the time, we had to basically be successful to be around next year. Utilizing PickFu paired with UA click tests, we were able to get a strong understanding of the type of audiences we'd be appealing to, general performance, and what sort of lift to expect from applying a celebrity to our currently existing game. And the data was not subtle. So the short of it is we applied this celebrity to our campaign, and ultimately it led to a smash hit. And this poll here is an actual PickFu poll, but not from the game that I'm talking about specifically, but just to give you an idea of what it could look like here. There are also a lot of cases where just a series of small changes can build into huge wins that largely utilize things that you already have. In this example from my past, we had an aging product that was on a downward turn, and we needed to breathe life into it fast before it risked being sunset. We didn't have a lot of resources, so optimizing what we already had was our best option to move quickly. We looked at the core aspects of all of our creative, which ultimately fell into two buckets: characters and USPs. With a few rounds of testing on characters, messaging, and gameplay screenshots, we were able to quickly address a lot of the low-hanging fruit, such as featuring our strongest characters and the icon. We definitely weren't at the time. Leading with our strongest USPs, or unique selling points, which at the time was featured in one of our last screenshots. From there, we were able to set a path forward to growing the game, and even today, it's still thriving. One of the many reasons we test is to identify which levers to pull to make the most impact. You can use it to diagnose what aspects are bringing your game down and move forward in a strong way. Then there are moments where it's not about fine-tuning. It's about a huge creative pivot. In this case, we had a game in development and already set up for success with an iterative test loop, which I'll get into later. We would ID on art, get feedback, and then apply that feedback to build on performance. While they were doing a lot of things right, they saw that with the changes, they weren't really moving the needle. And so every test essentially tied, and we started thinking, how else could we max out performance? So I suggested trying something vastly different to see if the current hero art was truly the best, just to be sure. And I think we were all a little shocked with the results. The new style swept the old in every segment, which opened up a lot of exploration with more unique concepts, which ultimately led and tested us into a very successful launch and reception. From these stories, I'm sure you can see it's a balance. It's not a one-size-fits-all type of situation. Another common concept from my past is licensing IP for a game. Let's take a look at that in practice. IP-based games are surprisingly rare. I've seen licensing and IP have a massive positive impact on games I've worked on. But before we get into that story, I wanted to highlight an interesting data point I found on Sensor Tower's blog. At the time this report was made, only 9% of mobile games used an IP. Why I bring it up is because those games accounted for nearly a quarter of total revenue. To me, that means studios that bet big on the right IP see massive returns. This also tells me that testing in this case is especially key to figuring out the right partnership between IP and game type. There's a point in my career where we had identified a winning formula with our core game type and wanted to explore IP licensing for a reskin. We were walking a fine line since this was not our first reskin, and we could easily run the risk of cannibalizing our other games with the wrong choice. We did a study on our current player base, then looked at holes and areas of opportunity for new audiences we could capture with an IP. We use that data to inform our test panel and reporting, and after rounds and rounds of tests, we were able to identify an IP that unlocked a new audience that was largely independent from the ones we currently captured within our existing titles. And the nice thing here is before the ink was even dry, we already had an idea of the audience, the type of lift we could expect, and kind of where it sat in terms of our portfolio. So now that we've talked through some practical applications from my past career, let's talk about how this can be applied as a framework. A single test is great, but it's the studios that build an iterative test loop that win long-term. And how do you do this? Let's take a page from science. First, create a hypothesis. What bets are we wanting to take and validate? From there, we'll want to build out a research stack to execute with. Consider all of the different types of tests you want to execute: polls, surveys, A/B tests. Then we execute those tests with a plan to evaluate the data, translate that into iterations, and rinse and repeat this cycle to scale. Think of testing as a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. It's not just about running a bunch of isolated tests. It's about building loops. Let's see how we can apply that on a larger scale. Here we have the entire development cycle of a game broken into stages. The way I like to think about it is games aren't static, and neither are your players. What works today might not work tomorrow, and especially so next month, quarter, or year. That's why iterative testing is key. Think of it like checking in with your audience as you're developing. Let's talk about the different stages here. First, with inception. At this point, understanding the market is most likely your objective. Before anything gets built, you need to know, who is this game for? What problems does it solve? Testing at this stage helps us identify and define and harden core ideas and create a foundation of buildable learnings that we can then move through the stages with. Then we move into concept development. Now that you've validated the problem spaces within the target audiences you're going after, now we test the solutions in the way of features, art styles, and even early positioning to see what resonates before investing too much into development. From there, we start hardening the product in the prototyping and design phase. And at this stage, we're wanting to optimize UI UX, see if the features are actually translating in usable, intuitive ways. If your menus, onboarding flow, or controls don't click, you can problem solve now, and you're not finding it out at launch. Moving into stage 4, 5, and 6. So usually around 4 and 5, this is when studios know to test, because you're starting to develop and harden into an MVP product, and you're moving in talking about soft launch. So when you're moving into beta and launch, naturally you want to test everything within the app stores and experiment, but hopefully if you had started at stage 1, you would have built off of these learnings and already gone into a tertiary market with pre-qualified assets. And then you hit launch and post-launch, and this is no longer a point where you're like, all right, everything's optimized, we're done, let's move on. Now you're wanting to create that loop I was talking about. Think about live ops or things that you might want to slot into a future sprint or roadmap. These are all things that you can constantly be giving feedback on from your players. And also, when we think about some of the tests that we were going for earlier, you can always be diagnosing new characters, new backgrounds, themes, all things that you can take into future tests as you continue those loops. It's very hard to get it right the first time, and even if you do, there's always room for improvement. So nothing should stop you from beginning to build that muscle. Let's look at some different ideas that you could test right now. A lot of friction that I've gotten in the past comes from a place of thinking that testing slows you down or takes weeks. But now that we know the new way of testing, this is not true. Now tests can take minutes, and it saves you thousands of dollars. And here are 4 that you could run today. Starting first with an icon test. It's very simple and use existing assets. Does your app icon stand out against the competition? Furthermore, are there different color schemes, characters, facial expressions, or art styles that could boost performance? Another quick win here is a screenshot order test. Are you leading with your best screenshots? Of all the USPs, featured gameplay, characters, are they the ones your potential audience cares about the most? What about testing your current ad creative? As I'm sure a lot of you know with video ads, there's very little time to capture attention, so why not run a first 5-second ad test? Are your ads hooking players fast enough? What about testing a few different iterations of the same video, where the first 5 seconds is completely different to get a better read on what will stop someone from scrolling before making 30 seconds worth of new content? For anyone that's affecting the roadmap, what about validating a feature or concept that you've ideated on that you could easily validate to ensure that you're getting on the right track and surface some insights that could strengthen it or even get you moving in a different direction? Because we're now out of the habit of just doing a singular test. Every test is no longer so precious because they take less than an hour. You can run as many as you'd like, all while saving from potential future costly mistakes. I also commonly hear that testing is just for UA or marketing teams, but it's truly for everyone. Starting first with creative directors, you can get real feedback before locking in art styles. Marketing managers, lower CPI by testing ads, like before you're ever applying spend. Product managers, validate features before they ever enter development. If you're inspired to start testing, you can swing by PickFoo's booth and take a page from some of my suggestions to get instant feedback on any of your existing game elements. The bottom line here is testing turns good ideas into great results. Don't leave it to chance, put it to test. Thank you for your time.